Remember, when you are asking a question, just kind of speak up. We do have a big mic there, and that way everybody can pick up. Now, last week when we were together, we kind of talked, we talked about quite a bit of stuff, but let me just give you the last few things we talked about. We talked about the fact that he was granted permission to be able to go. He actually had letters basically saying that he has safe travel all the way to from Artaxerxes himself. And then also, he wanted letters to be able to get timber. Remember, the timber was from the national forest. It would be like you and I today trying to go into Yosemite and trying to take trees down. We wouldn't be able to do that with special permission unless we had special permission. And then, of course, as he's going back, remember he gave them army officers and cavalry as protection. Now, the king would not travel without protection, and the king did not want somebody as important as Nehemiah, the cupbearer, to travel without protection as well. And even though he has these letters basically from Artaxerxes saying, hey, give him safe travel and make sure that he's safe, he still wanted to make sure that he had a personal entourage to take care of that. And then, of course, when they get there, we have Sanballat, the Horonite, and then, of course, we have Tobiah, the Ammonite. And they're there basically, and they're a little bit frustrated because remember, Sanballat is the governor of Samaria. Now, Samaria is always north of Jerusalem. So he's the governor of the Samarian area, but he is from a place called Beth Horon, and I'll actually point that out here in a minute. And that's why he's called what he's called as far as the Horonite. But also then you got to remember that Tobiah is the governor of Ammon. Now, Ammon is to the west. To the east of the Jordan. But Ammon actually is today modern day Jordan. But the kingdom of Ammon was also enemies, but they're all part of the Persian Empire. They hated Israel, though. And so these guys are a little bit frustrated now because they hear about this. Now, let's go ahead and pick up in number 8. And let me get down here to slide number 15. And that's where we can pick up. Well, let me give you this information right here. So this information right... Are you joking me? It's not moving. Bear with me, guys. I am so sorry. Boy, I am being tested tonight. It's hard to breathe when you just really want to scream. It really is. Give it another shot here. Bear with me. It's not supposed to be this difficult. It's not really supposed to be this difficult at all. From the beginning, and there we go. There's all the people. All right, let's see, does it move? And it's still not moving. All right, can you see the screens moving now? Okay, all right. Then I have to move them manually here, so just bear with me. All right, here we go. You guys are seeing it. This just goes to show you that nobody is perfect. Nobody at all. All right, so here we go. All right, so Sanballat. All right, so remember, this is what I want to make sure that you guys understood this. He was born in a place called Beth Horon. I'm going to show you a map of where that's located, and that's going to be on map number 1 when we get to it. But he is the governor of Samaria, and his name actually comes out of the Babylonian god, and that is Sin-Ubalith. That is where his name comes from, which means sin, by the way, and the word sin is actually the moon god. It's not actually talking about sin as you committed a sin, although worshiping a false god is a sin, but nonetheless. But sin was a moon god, so his name means, Sanballat means sin gives life. But then Tobiah. Now, Tobiah is a name that we all sounds a little bit more familiar to us, especially if you were raised Catholic, because there is actually a book of Tobiah between the Old and the New Testaments. And so Tobiah, you can see it, by the way, it's a Hebrew name, and you can see what it means there, or Sumerian, but it's actually Hebrew. But Tobiah is a Hebrew name, which means Yahweh is good. However, then you have to think, well, now why would Tobiah be so upset like Sanballat? Why would he be so upset that the Israelites are coming back and they're going to rebuild the city? I'll have to get more into that later on. But I wanted to make sure that you knew exactly who these people were. Now, if you look on the map, and I don't have the way to show you, but if you can see where Jerusalem is on the map, if you look a little bit to the north, and look a little bit to the north and to the east, right by Gezer, you're going to look right over to the right, and you'll see Ben Haran. That's where Sanballat has been born. He's a Haranite. Now, that's important only to know for one reason. He's born in Israel. Now, if you look over on the map on the right, you'll see the kingdom of Moab, and then right above it in the yellow, you'll see the kingdom of Ammon. So you'll see that it's on the right side. In other words, it's on the right side of the Jordan. So this is modern day Jordan today, the country of Jordan. But that's where Ammon is. They've always been enemies of Israel, and yet that's the guy with the Hebrew name. So it's kind of a little bit messed up. But this is the scattering, or the dispersia. That's the reason why we see how people are scattered around. But remember, this has been this is now probably about 160 years since the original fall of Jerusalem from Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, that lasted 70 years. After that, Cyrus says, go home. You're welcome to go home. And actually, it's quite funny because the other day I was watching a History Channel. The History Channel, which is extremely liberal, but I was watching the History Channel, and it's a series called How Kingdoms Are Built, or Building Empires is what it's called. And it actually had Persia. And it actually spoke about Cyrus releasing the Jews and sending them back home and writing on the Cyrus cylinder. So it actually said everything that he should have said. And it's the guy, by the way, the guy that's the historian, and he's a great historian, is the guy that played the original RoboCop movie. He was RoboCop. It's that guy. But nonetheless, I wanted to make sure that you saw where Sanballat is from, as well as Tobiah is from. But let's go ahead, and I want to show you something else here as well. So this is where we're going to be speaking about, I'm just going to keep that up there, but we're going to be speaking about this gentleman, Gershom the Arab. Okay? Gershom the Arab. It should be no R. It should be Geshem the Arab. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's going on. So here in question number 8, how does Nehemiah find the city of Jerusalem? He finds it in ruins, and it's exactly, as a matter of fact, look with me in verses 13 and 14. It says, the walls of Jerusalem were broken down, and the gates had been destroyed by fire, and there was not enough room for his mount. Now, what is he talking about there? His horse, exactly right. There was not enough room for his horse to even get through the fountain gate to the king's pool, which, by the way, in the New Testament, we know it as the Pool of Siloam. That's always called the king's pool. So that's how bad it was. I mean, the walls were not only crumbled, but they were scattered. They were everywhere. It wasn't like they just fell a couple of spots, but it was so bad that he couldn't get around. Now, the reason why I have this up is I want to go ahead and show you a little bit. Let's go ahead and read together so that you can see this. Look with me in chapter 2, and I want you to go ahead and say, start with me by starting in verse 13. So the reason why I have this up is I want you to see, where you see it says city of Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, the city's walls, look with me now starting at the valley gate. And I'm going to be reading from what scripture says, and you can almost see the path he's taking. So start with me in verse 13. By night, I went out through the valley gate towards the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate. So the Jackal Well, by the way, was just a place of watering. They called it the Jackal Well, even though it really wasn't for jackals, but anybody could actually bring their animals there. So right between the Valley Gate and the Dung Gate is where the Jackal Well is actually at. All right, so the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down and its gates had been destroyed by fire. And then I moved on towards the Fountain Gate. Now you can see where the Fountain Gate is. So now they were going south, if you will, the way that we're looking at it. They were going south, and now he's turning to head back up. So the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, which is the Pool of Siloam, by the way. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through. And so I went up to the valley by night examining the wall. Now the valley is talking about here is the like by the Watergate and all that. That is actually the Kidron Valley. And in the Kidron Valley, there was plenty of places, I mean, for mules and for even carts and all that to move through. Although from the bottom of the valley to the top gate is 500 feet. But there's a roadway down inside that valley. And so he has moved from the valley gate down around the tip, and he's now moving up towards the water gate and the horse gate and so on and so forth. That's where he's moving. Verse 16, the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or to the priests or to the nobles or the officials or any other who would be doing the work. In other words, I want to make sure that you understand that when Nehemiah arrives, it's not like he's going to see how bad it is and then he's going to say, well, I can't do this. He's actually just trying to find out in his own mind how serious the situation is. He has heard that the city's in ruins. He's heard that the wall is tore down, that the gates are burned. He wants to see it himself, but he doesn't want to do it during the daytime because he already has enemies that are already there. They already know about it. And so he does this by night so that he can kind of see the situation. And he realizes that after he does this by night, that this place really is truly a wreck. It's a mess. And you have to wonder sometimes when you go through something like that. Remind me to say this at the end, Missy, please. I got to talk about that. That is for the Harvest Fest. But it's amazing when you go through and see all this, that even in the midst of trials, even in the midst of depression, even in the midst of all that they're seeing, what the conclusion comes out to be. So, considering the amount of damage that had been done to the walls and to the gates and how long it had sat empty and nobody bothering it any way, shape, or form, you have to imagine that this had to be one of those things that just seemed overwhelming. Let me give you an example. Has anybody here, and you can figure it out in your own mind, has anybody here ever had a job to do at home that was so bad that when you looked at it, you thought to yourself, I don't even know where to start? So everybody's laughing. That tells me yes. All right. So if that's happened to you, raise your hand. So everybody. Okay. So now you know exactly what it's like. Now, by the way, compound that to the point of that if you don't do this job, there's no safety for the people. Compound that to the point that if you don't do this job, the temple can't be protected. Therefore, worship can't even resume. Now, compound all that, because we're all probably talking about garages or our house or boxes we've never unpacked. We're talking about stuff like that. But the fate of a nation and the security of a people doesn't lie in your garage. But here it does. So you can imagine what it must have been like. And probably even wondering, I would imagine, and the reason why I'm saying this is because I want you to understand the mindset of Nehemiah as much as we can. You have to wonder that this was probably even more frustrating when he saw the damage at night. He realized and recognized how bad it really was. This is the first time he's ever seen it. And he knows that the people had been set free for almost 100 years. And nobody has done this job. Why? Why has nobody done this job? Anyhow, so that's kind of where he's at. And so we can see where he is going, how he has kind of traversed. He never went further up to the north. Well, he probably went all the way on the east side there, like the horse gate, the east gate, the inspection gate, the sheep gate, but he never went further over the other way. He just went basically from valley and swept up north. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that, where he was, because after taking all of this in, look with me in number 9. What does Nehemiah tell the Jews he wants to do? Exactly right. Verse 17, come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. Now, I think he said that for a couple of reasons. Because he's reminding them, would somebody please close that door? I appreciate that. He's reminding them we are a disgrace. We're a disgrace for multiple reasons. We're a disgrace because for 100 years, we've been out of exile. For 100 years, roughly, now when I say 100, I'm talking roughly, it's about 90 something. For 100 years, we've had inhabitants back here in Israel. And for 100 years, these walls have remained broken down. These gates have remained unfixed. So let us start to build these walls and get this back so that we are no longer a disgrace. And by the way, not only a disgrace to our neighbors, but we're a disgrace to God. Because here's the deal. And how many times have we ever said this? Or how many times have you ever heard a person say this to a Christian? Well, I mean, if you're a Christian and God really loved you, wouldn't he make that happen? But the fact is, if I don't do my part, God's is going to always meet me where I'm at. But if God's waiting for you to do your job, you're going to be waiting a long time because you still have a job to do. The gospel message has been given to the church to give to the world. We sit back and say, why in the world is nobody becoming Christians? Because the church really isn't doing their job. Jesus only has a plan A. You do the job. The gospel's always spread from mouth to mouth, from human to human, just like COVID. It goes from human to human. And if we're not spreading that, well, then we're not doing our job. And so he says, come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem that we will no longer be a disgrace. That disgrace, once again, is twofold. It's not only to the people around us who are mocking the Israelites, but it's also to God. Because as long as we allow this to happen and the temple sits up there in ruins and it's not being used, we are a disgrace to God. Now, that doesn't mean God doesn't love them. It doesn't mean God's not showing love, grace, and mercy. It's not that at all. But God does say, you need to get off your bottom and do a job here. Any questions about that or any comments about that? All right, let's go ahead and look at number 10 then. How did they respond to his plan? That's exactly right. Let's get together. Let's start building it. And they began the work. So really all they needed was a leader to step up. How many times, by the way, in this world, if a leader will just step up, people will follow. People want to do the right thing. But they've got to have that example. They've got to have somebody stand up and say, look, we can't be afraid to do this anymore. We've got to do it regardless of the consequence. And by the way, as Nehemiah starts building this wall and as it really starts to progress and take more and more shape and more form, they go from people mocking them and then they come to people actually threatening their life. You see, what Solomon said is so true. There's nothing new under the sun. If you're going to do the will of God, you can expect to get mocked, made fun of. You can expect all this stuff to happen to you. As a matter of fact, anything less, you should wonder if I'm doing the right job. And so he says, let's build the wall. They say, let's get started. And it begins. It all begins. So once again, even in the midst of trials, even in the midst of distress, even in the midst of destruction, we must still do what we are called to do. And that's exactly what Nehemiah was doing. Nehemiah saw this was a tremendous job. This is more than just a couple of holes in the wall. But hey, this is what God has commissioned me to do. This is what God sent me to do. I've got to do the job, whether they join me or not. Any questions about that? Any comments? Well, remember that you're talking about the picture from Revelation that we get, right? There'll be a new heaven and new earth, and then there's exactly. But remember, it's apocalyptic style writing, which is very symbolic. We don't really know if walls are going to be there. It's just the idea that everybody knows Jerusalem as the walled city, the beautiful walled city. So when we think of the New Jerusalem, the image is always going to be the beautiful walled city. But there'll be no reason for walls or protection or anything. Yeah, exactly. Well, there's no need for the sun because Jesus Christ is going to be our light. So yeah, we don't have to worry about attack or anything like that from anybody. Yeah, so in that aspect, you're right. But I hope that answers your question. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Let's go ahead and look at number 17. How did Sanballat, Tobiah? I said number 11, didn't I? It's been a long day, and I love everybody. So when tonight is over, just give me a hug, okay? All right. Number 11. All right, 1 after 10. How did Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem actually respond to the news? They mocked, they ridiculed Nehemiah and the Jews, and they accused him of rebelling against the king. Now, I want to make sure that we understand this one because this is This is pretty good, or this is really important for us to remember. Geshem, by the way, was the governor of the Nile Delta. And I know I've got, let me just jump down a couple of slides so that we can all see this. Okay, so not this one. Let me get down here one more. Okay. I may have actually skipped over one.
Go back up before the city walls. We had one there.
Okay, well, that's the trade routes, which we'll get to later on. But let me get right up here to Geshem himself. Okay, so let me give you an image of what I'm talking about in the Nile, what he is the governor of in the Nile Delta. That's the temple wall. So, all right. So in the Nile Delta, if you can picture, if you're really good at geography, okay? So you're in the Middle East, you see here is, right here going north and south is Israel. And then you got the Nile Delta, Egypt. You got the Nile Delta here and the Nile River. The delta is where it V's out. And then, so he is actually the governor of all the Nile Delta. So from like Libya all the way through the Nile Delta to the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula, which is actually just a little bit south of Jerusalem, and all the way over to about the end of the Sinai Peninsula, and then north to Moab, and to also Ammon. So he is the governor of all that area. It makes like an L laying down. So in other words, he's the governor of this area. And while he probably really doesn't care much about the Israelites rebuilding, he does have a problem that he's going to have to contend with. And it's a problem that we have to understand. And this is the reason why they began working together, as we now begin to look at, are you rebelling against the king? Because by decree, by Artaxerxes, at some point he said to stop building in Jerusalem. Now, no reason why, no even evidence of this reason, but he says, are you going against the king? Now, all that was meant to do was to scare them. And I want to make sure that we understand, because when we talk about this, we still see this style of argument even used today. And that is simply this, that we will mock you. So when you're actually trying to be a Christian and you're trying to do the right thing, let me go ahead and go back up here to Gershom. Oh, right here it is. All right. So when you go up, so the idea is that when we talk about, when you're trying to do something as a Christian, you're trying to live the life that you're called to do, you're going to have people mock you. You are going to have people ridicule you. They're going to call you all kinds of stuff. And by the way, if the mocking and the ridicule isn't enough to stop you from doing what you're doing, guess what comes next? Well, you're not allowed to do that legally. And by the way, the greatest place that this is ever heard is in two places. The workplace, some of the time, and the schoolhouse all the time. Kids are always being told, you can't say that. You can't say that's wrong. You can't say it's a sin. You can't bring your Bible. You can't pray. Even though we all know better than that. Because the First Amendment makes it very clear what I can and cannot do, and how people tell me that I can't say something in a public place that my tax money paid for is they lie. Even though we know that, we still have people for some reason, both kids and adults, that fall for that. Well, I don't want little Johnny to get in trouble for praying at lunch, so I just told him not to do it. He can just kind of silently do it with his eyes open to fool everybody. Really? That's what we're going to lead to now, telling our children, is that we got to fool people? That's not at all. So what exactly happens here to Nehemiah and the rest of the Israelites is still the same operating procedure of people today. But it happens in the workplace as well. I mean, when I worked at Citibank, before I left Citibank in 2004, there were people already saying, oh, a person couldn't put up verses in their pod area. They couldn't pin up verses on the wall. Really? And the reason why is, well, it could be offensive to others. Yes, so could your gay lifestyle be. And so could your foul mouth. And so could your promiscuity. It's always offensive to me. But I don't say you have to leave. So you're not going to tell me to take down my verse. Because there'll be a physical altercation if there is. I mean, I may be a Christian. I'll turn the cheek once, but I'm going to clock you next time. It's just the idea, I really wouldn't do that. While people were watching, I wouldn't do that. The idea is we have to know where we stand, but we also have to be willing to stand for what we know. And that's the difference. And that's exactly what's happening to them here. So they automatically then eventually throw out, well, the king said you can't do this. But really the problem here, when we talk about all this right here is, so here's a little bit of information about Geshem. Like I said, the R should not be there. He has actually got more power than Tobiah and Sanballat. He actually has more power. He is ruling a coalition of Arab tribes in the southern of Jerusalem. That kind of gives you everything. The northern part of the Sinai Peninsula, the Nile Delta in Egypt, all the way over to Moab, and as well as Ammon. So he has a lot of power. He has a lot of tribes. So with Geshem, by the way, the enemies, with him being in part of this, now Jerusalem has enemies to the north, Samaria and Ammon, and then, of course, all the way down to the south. So they're now surrounded. The only other way they got to where there's nobody against them is the Mediterranean. And that's exactly why he joins in. He joins in to be able to help them in that situation. And I want to go ahead and tell you a little bit of information about Geshem, because many people said for years, well, we don't even know if this Geshem person is real. By the way, they said that about King David. They said it about Paul. They said it about everybody. It's just what people do. We ridicule you because you've made up this name, and we see it's in the Bible, so it shows the Bible's false. We don't even know if this person's real. But we did find something, and this was found in archaeology in the 5th century. But it was a silver vessel that actually had Geshem's name, and it appears on the silver vessel, which was dedicated to an Arabian goddess named Han-Elat. Han-Elat, by the way, was what her name was, and this was in the 5th century. And this is what it read. And this is the exact, because by the way, you have to know that Cain is how we transferred it into the Greek and all that. But this is what it says. It says Cain, which is actually Kanu, Cain or Kanu, the son of Geshem, which his name actually in the Arabic was actually Gashmu. That's his name, which was the king of Kedar. Now the king of Kedar really was a coalition of Arab tribes, and he was trying to bring them all together. Well, he didn't try, it was in the Persian Empire, and he had them all together, and they were all under him. And this would have caused a disturbance for him, mainly not because he really cared about the temple. He didn't even care about the walls. The problem that he had now is trade routes, because he's in charge of the northern part of Egypt. And guess where all commerce from the northern part of Egypt, if it's going to go up to Turkey, or if it's going to even make it over, yeah, they got some shipping ports, but the easiest route and the safest route, so that you don't lose people at sea, is land routes. And Israel sits in the perfect land route, north, south, east, and west. And so that's where his problem really comes in. So let's go ahead and look at this next area. So the trade route is the major concern that's actually going on here. His concern is whoever has access, by the way, whoever has access to the trade routes has access to fees, has access to tolls. You need to pass through here because it's the easiest route. Well, you're going to have to pay us $5,000. And you know what? If they have a big enough cargo, they will, because it's the safest route to do. So that's the problem here. And also the problem is whoever controls these trade routes also controls armies being resupplied. Because if Egypt, or if, somebody from, of course, at that time, it wouldn't have been Saudi Arabia. It would have been Midia. So if Midia is at war with somebody to the north, they've got to go through Israel in order to resupply their troops. So if Israel is now back up and going, and they actually have a viable military again, they can actually control resupply. And they guess there's a couple things they can do. Not that the Israelites did, but they can charge you more money now, because you have to get these supplies there. And it's a lot shorter to go straight as opposed to it is to go over to the ocean and then shoot up in the ocean. And you also have to, like I said, go against the currents and so on and so forth. So whoever does control these routes controls not only the money, controls the supply, but can also control the resupplying of enemies, not only if it was against themselves, but also if it was against their allies. So this would have been a major, major deal. And with that in mind, now you can look at this. So if you look at this picture right now, you're going to see multiple lines. So if you see the brown lines out in the ocean, that is the routes of, obviously, that is port routes. There's not a lot of port routes, but there are some port routes. But if you notice, they're right by Giza and Ashdod and all those areas going all the way up. There are two major roads there. The really dark blue road in the center, going from Beersheba all the way up. That is the major trade route. And by the way, all those major trade routes, if you actually look up there, you can see meet at Megiddo and Hazor. Now, Megiddo and Hazor is right there in the middle, and it turns west, or actually it turns east. It turns east, but also from Megiddo and Hazor, you can go west if you want to go out to the shipping lanes. So Israel controls every major trade route, including The red line, by the way. But rarely was the red line used, but it was used. But they controlled every major trade route. So if you lived anywhere, if you will, by the Gulf of Aqaba, which by the way it's called the two arms of the Red Sea now, but the Gulf of Aqaba is the one on the right. If you lived anywhere in the Sinai Peninsula, anywhere up in Turkey, or anywhere in Moab and all those places, if Israel's back, they control it. You can see where this would be a frustration, especially after now almost 150, 60 years of being able to run it themselves and do anything that they want. Oh, by the way, make a killing off of it also. Because there are also people that would pay money to say, we're actually going to steal from a couple of caravans, turn your back for a while. And of course, people that were unethical and had no morality, which was people like Geshar and all these other ones, they would have gladly done that for money. And so that's what the big issue is for him in this situation. Now, we've talked about the ridicule and all that stuff right there, but I want to go ahead and look at number 12. Where are we at? So we may get done a little bit early tonight, but I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about this in detail. First of all, any questions or comments at all about anything in 9, 10, or 11? Any questions about that at all? I'm sorry to throw so much history out, but we have to understand this, especially when we talk about Ezra.
It's a good question, and I know it's probably the answer is for this. But each gate that was labeled wasn't just for those specific things, like Fishgate was specific.
Mainly, it mainly was, but I mean, you could enter any gate, but mainly that's what you would find there. And you would usually, like for example, if we go back to where you got it, like nobody ever entered through the dung gate, I should tell you. Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, right beneath the dung, you know what? Let me just go back for a few minutes. Everybody bear with me. I'm going to go back to this one area so that everybody can see this map again, because I want to show you something. All right. So if you look down here at the dung gate, and you see where that's located, right? At the very tip, right? At the very bottom. And then I'm going to show you the picture of, if you look on the right side, you can actually see a depiction of what this city. Now, by the way, this is the old city of Jerusalem. Now, if you go to Jerusalem today, those walls still exist in the old city. Now they're reinforced and everything now, but then outside the city in a large area is modern day Jerusalem. But you're going to find this is the old city. This is like the city of David and Hezekiah and all those people. But at the very bottom down here, you can see that there is a big area for this dung gate. Well, and you see that there's a little right at the very bottom on the left. You can looks like almost like two where cars, not cars, but you know where carts. Yeah, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what am I looking at? A wagon? But wagons and all that would come up there. Well, here's what happened at the dung gate. Two things, and this is important to keep in mind. This area was also called Gehenna. Now, you've probably heard me use that phrase before. Gehenna is one of the words that they also use to describe hell. And there were two reasons why. And usually whenever we read the word hell in English and then talk about the never-ending fire and the stench, it's because, by the way, everything that was thrown outside the dung gate, it was always burning. As a matter of fact, there was always a fire outside the dung gate. When you're throwing that much waste out, when you're throwing that much trash out, and everybody that lived in the city and everybody that lived around the walls, they all took their trash and their dung. Dung is usually the animals, because usually humans used cat holes, but usually this was animal dung and all that was put there. But the animal dung that didn't burn, guess what people would do with carts? They would haul it off and they would use it for farming. That's exactly right. So that's the reason why you would always see in any depiction you ever see, normally, like if you're in Israel and you actually get to see Israel in the first century and it's a huge model, I mean, it's amazing to see. Right by the dung gate, you can see the trail of the carts because that's where everybody went. If you needed something for fertilizing your ground, you went to the dung gate. And there wasn't a fire in some area, you put a few shovels in and you hauled it back with a mule. And you put it in your ground because it was animal dung that was there. But this place was always burning and it always reeked. That's why it's so far from the temple. You can notice.
So what amazes me though is that it's so close, but it's still to the water gate and the apple gate. Which that's gross. So when you go to gather the water, you're smelling.
Well, your water gate was actually, the water gate's where you went in to get water. So the water, in other words, the well wasn't outside the city wall. It was inside the city wall. And it was far enough away, even though on the picture it looks like it's close, it's far enough away because it's the Pool of Shalom, where the tunnel of Hezekiah went actually all the way under the city of Jerusalem for a quarter mile. So it went in under not like the temple area, but it went underneath the city, like from the lower part all the way up to about the middle part of that finger, if you will, if you want to look at it that way. And I had a chance to walk through Hezekiah's tunnel, which still runs with water today. And Hezekiah's tunnel was dug about 1,000, maybe 1,500 years, maybe 700 years before Christ, and it still runs with water today that is crystal clear and knee deep and frigid. So when we walked through, we had to wear shorts, and we were told to wear Crocs. So I'm thinking, well, we're in Israel, the water's not going to be really cold. It's frigid. By the time I got out a quarter mile later, my toes were blue. I mean, not just mine, everybody was. But it was really, but the water was crystal clear. And, I even said, it looks clean enough to drink. And they said, well, go ahead. Everybody, go ahead. And you did. And we all tasted it. It tasted really good. You know what it tasted a lot like? It tasted a lot like Fiji water. Fiji. The one that charged you like $7 a bottle. But anyhow, nonetheless. But it was really, really good, and it still flows with water. So actually, if there was a major attack on Israel today, well, I say Israel meaning Jerusalem. If there was a major attack there today, they would still have a flowing water supply that never ends. And that's the reason why Jesus would talk about the life that gives water, the water that gives life, and the never-ending spring, and that he is the spring of the well of the water of life. And he, by the way, when he spoke that, he was by the Pool of Shalom. So we need to keep that in mind. All right. So I wanted to make sure that we understood that part. Is there any other questions about that? In those gates, that was the main thing that came in, but you could come in from any gate that you needed to. And then once you got in and you went up to the Temple Mount, at the very top up there, you can see at the top, the Temple Mount raising up, because the Temple Mount was always meant to be higher than the rest of the city, because it was called the dwelling place of God, and God does not dwell among men. Of course, they don't realize that Jesus is Emmanuel. But the idea is you walked up, you can see the stairwell that goes all the way up. And when you got to the top, before you went up there, you had to get into a mikvah. And that mikvah was the self-immersion. And you went under because you could not enter the Temple Mount until you were ceremonially cleansed. And that mikvah was a self-immersion. You come up out of the water, you went up the clean stairwell, and once you went up the clean stairwell, you can then enter up the long staircase and get up on the Temple Mount. But you could not enter the Temple Mount or walk on the Temple Mount unless you had been self-immersed in a mikvah. I'm sorry? No, not sprinkled, not poured, not even splashed. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the reason why. And we chatted about it before, but that's the reason why baptism by John was not new. What was new was that a person had to baptize you, because in the time of the mikvah or the temple, I could self-immerse myself, but I can't do that anymore. You see, when Jesus comes, I'm not capable of actually getting rid of my sins. So somebody else who's already been cleansed has to take me underwater and bring me up out of the water. And now I'm cleansed, but I can't do it. Somebody else has to do it, which reminds us that I can't remove my sins. Somebody else had to, and that's Jesus Christ. Does that make sense? So that's a little bit about the city there, the immediate city. Any other questions or comments about that before we move on to this last portion? Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I think I've covered everything on this one right here. The trade route and all that, the King of Kedar, yep. Okay, and then once again, we're back to that map. All right, so let me get down here now. Now, I want you, we talked about the ridicule and the mocking by God. You're breaking the law. We talked about all that, and I think everybody fully understands that. But I also want you to notice that the ridicule that goes on is the same that you and I even face today. And even though you and I face ridicule today, and even though you and I will face mockings today, now nothing like what they were going through, and nothing like Christians have experienced in the past, or even Christians that experience in the world today. We are more than blessed in the United States that while we might get picked on, we don't have the fear that many Christians have in Arabic worlds, that if you're caught being a Christian, you will be killed. Well, your family will be killed first, but then you'll be killed after you watch that. So they're mocked, and even though, and then they're told they're breaking the law, but please know that you, for example, in America, we're protected by the Constitution for our beliefs, and we're protected by that for our opinions. So no matter where we are, never surrender, ever. Nehemiah and the guys they didn't surrender. He said, let's build. They said, let's go, let's get started. Now later on, they're going to start to say, hey, as the mocking and the ridicule starts to get a little bit more vicious, they're going to say to Nehemiah, so what do we do if we're building the wall and we start to get attacked? And he goes, it's really simple. Now, that's what I love about Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a very practical person. He says it's simple. You lay stones with one hand, and you keep your sword on the other, your hand on the other sword. And if they come up while you're laying a stone, set the stone down, take out your sword, you fight them, and once you kill them, you go back to laying stone. Pretty simple solution, isn't it? You put stone in until you have to kill somebody, you kill them, and you go back to putting up stone. And that way, tomorrow, the stone's higher. And we don't have to worry about anybody attacking that area. And so that's what and we'll get to more about that later on. And I know that sounds vicious, but the fact is, that's just the way it is. But I want you to notice his response, which takes us to number 12. How does Nehemiah respond to the criticism, the ridiculing, the mocking, all of that? How does he respond? It's exactly right. The God of heaven, it's in verse 20, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Now, I should bring something up. Think about question number 5. What's the purpose of history? Nehemiah knows how important it is, especially in this part of the world, that we understand history. And what he was saying is Sanballat and Tobiah, who, by the way, Tobiah actually has a Jewish name. What he is saying to them is you have no right to this town, and you have no historic claim. So what he is saying in modern English is pretty much like this. Nehemiah is saying, back off. We got a job to do. We have to kill you. We will. That's what he's saying. God's going to give us the victory. You've already lost. We're here. We're not going anywhere. So I want you to notice that ridicule will always come to Nehemiah. It'll come until they're even done. Ridicule still happens today. Never surrender your position no matter what. And if you ever surrender your position for appeasement to the world and not God, you've made a very poor decision. And that's not a slap in the face. That's just a reality. If I sit here and hear somebody talking about how I'll use a simple one, how it is a woman's right to kill a baby inside of her body. And I sit there and go, my heavens, I don't agree with none of this, but I'm not going to say something. We just let an opportunity go by that we can stand for God and say, let me go ahead and tell you, God of heaven's against that. Very much so. And so am I as a follower of Jesus Christ. And you can go, now I don't mean be vicious and mean and say, oh, well, I got a sword in my car, I'll kill you. I'm not talking about that. But the idea of letting them know that what they're saying is wrong, and you can mock me, you can say anything you want, you can even get mad at me all you want. But I am not changing my position because, A, I'm more concerned about what God thinks about me than I am what you think about me. What I'd like to do is have a conversation with you about it. Now, maybe that'll happen or not, but too many Christians give in for appeasement. Or somebody will present something, I know you may be against same sex, but you know what? Love is love, and nobody can deny love. And we go, okay, well, all right, I understand what you're saying, and we just kind of let it go. Or we can say, well, no, there's 4 kinds of love that scriptures speak about. It's agape, it's, storge, it's eros, it's philia. Which one do you think that is, that you got? And you know what they're going to say? I have no idea what you're saying. And then I can go, well, let me explain what agape love is. Let me explain what storge love is. Let me explain what eros love is. Let me explain and we can do that. And then we can take that eros love and say, does that sound familiar? Like erotic? Oh yeah, that sounds familiar. That's because it's been twisted and tainted. So when you look at another person of the same sex and say, I'm in love with them, and it's real love, I want you to know what you've done is you've taken a love that God created. It's eros love, by the way, is for my husband or my wife, depending on what sex I am. It's for my husband or wife. It was never created to be erotic in the fact that I can do whatever I want, whatever tickles my fancy. It's not what it is. Do you see how you've mangled that? Or the people that have been around you? It gives us an opportunity to have a real conversation. But oftentimes we have to throw out a word or two that they don't know. Because when we do, guess what we do? We pique their interest. Do you know what that word agape means? Nope. I had a conversation with a woman one time at Citibank who was basically telling me, and this is no joke, how silly I was because I believed that baptism was an important part of my walk with Christ. And I said, now, and not only that baptism was important, but the mode of baptism doesn't matter. I could be sprinkled. I could have a jug of water poured on my head. And I said, well, I mean, I guess you could probably feel that way if you don't know what the Greek word baptizo means. You know what the Greek word baptizo means? And she goes, no. And then I said, well, then why are we having a debate? Because the Greek word used in the Bible means to be immersed, to be plunged under, to be buried. Does that sound like pouring? Does that sound like sprinkling? Well, no, but that was the word then. I said, well, you know, the same word then means the same thing now. And then I go into, have you changed the definition of who Jesus is because we're 2,000 years later? And the point is, it offers an opportunity to continue to speak, but you've got to pique that information or that person's, and they may not still listen to you, but guess where they're going to come if they ever do have a question, especially if you treated them with respect and honor and dignity. That's exactly right. That's right, because I want you to know that while I disagree with you, I don't hate your guts. Because that's just stupidity and infantilism. If I don't agree with you because of that, I'm going to treat you like junk. That's just being a big baby. Absolutely. Absolutely. In all aspects of life. So Nehemiah's response was very concise and very clear. The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem, no claim or historic right to it. Bye-bye. And he goes to work. So, and that's what we have to keep in mind too. Any questions or comments about anything at all that we've talked about tonight? Next week, we'll start fresh in 3. Huh? Oh, I do. Thank you. All right. So up here, I have the Kids Zone Harvest Festival volunteers. We are still in need of a couple. And if you have not signed up for coming to the Harvest Festival, but you are coming, please write your name. There's 2 sheets here. There's more room, but we need to know exactly how many will be here. And we would love to have you, but please keep this in mind and come up here. And on your way out to sign up. I should also remind you that we do have our men's breakfast. And if you've not signed up for men's breakfast on Saturday morning, but you're going to come, please let Brad know before you leave. And so that way we've got that down as well. All right. So any other questions or comments before we leave? Do not worry about the chairs. So everybody good? All right. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity to study tonight in chapter 2 of Nehemiah. And thank you for all the history that goes around it, Father, that begins to clear up what's going on. And in that history, Father, we also see that history hasn't changed much at all. And we understand those words more and more as we study what Solomon said, what the wisdom that you gave him to say, that there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing changes except clothing, hairstyles, and names. So bless us, be with us, and guide us. May we always have the confidence that Nehemiah had, Father. May we always be willing to stand for your word, and may we never, ever be part of appeasement, because we know, Father, ultimately, we stand before you and not the world. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.